With Daring Faith, Chapter 13, From House to House. Amy and Ponnamal stood outside the next hut and clapped as Indians do to announce their presence. Come in, they heard. Here they found two young women and one old one who were genuinely interested in hearing the good news of salvation. After listening in rapt attention for a whole hour, one of the young women said, "Please come back every day and tell us more." "Oh, how I wish we could," Amy answered. "We can come back again, but we cannot come every day." "But why not?" "There are hundreds of villages and thousands of women, and they all need to hear about Jesus, and there are so few of us to tell." Amy felt suddenly filled with frustration. Why were there so few of them among so many? The old woman shook her head. "I believe what you tell us," she said slowly, "and maybe these young ones can follow. But for me it is too late. I cannot break my caste now. Where would I go? What would I do? You came too late for me. Why didn't you come sooner?" Amy struggled for a reply, but even as she spoke she felt that her answer wasn't good enough. Why hadn't someone come sooner to tell? When the little children entered and demanded attention, Amy and Ponnamal left with regret. As they approached the next house, Ponnamal said, "The Lord sent us those women for encouragement." "Yes," Amy answered slowly, "and rebuke." One young woman was sitting in front of the house they approached. She eyed them carefully. "I have seen you walking from house to house," she said. "You are here to tell us about the next life." Amy hesitated as the three of them entered the darkened interior. How she defined the next life and how this woman defined it would be two different things. But the woman didn't wait for an answer. "I plan to make a pilgrimage to the sacred Ganges River some day," she boasted. "Then in the next life I will come back as a man." She burst out laughing, and other laughter accompanied hers. Amy's eyes adjusted to the darkness to see several women, all adorned, as was customary for Indian women, with hundreds of rupees worth of jewels, bracelets, armbands, necklaces, earrings, and nose rings. Their laughter indicated that they must not have a very high regard for the men in their lives. Another woman spoke as she pounded out a huge slab of cow dung that she planned to dry later for fuel. "Are you married or widowed?" "I am a widow," said Ponnamal. "Too bad," said the woman with a little shake of her head. "My daughter there, she is a widow too." She inclined her head toward a girl huddled in a back corner, a little slip of a thing who looked only 9 or 10, but who claimed to be 13 when Amy asked her age. The little girl's harsh white sari stood out in bold contrast to the vivid colors that the other women wore, the love of every Indian woman's heart. But the most obvious difference about her was that she wore no jewels, curses of widowhood. "Yes, we married her to the old man down the street because he took a fancy to her and was willing to give us a large sum for her, but they were married only a year before he died. And now, well, of course she would have died at his burial if the British government had not made that against the law. But which is worse, to die right away or to die slowly, living out a long life of widowhood?" There were murmurs of agreement from the other women, and then the silence of contemplation. Widowhood was a curse. What hope was there for a woman in the next life if she were not married? They had laughed at their young sister's joke about the men, but widowhood was a stark reality. Anyone who saw a widow in the daylight considered himself cursed too. So widows, even though they may have been only children when their husbands died, were often kept hidden away in inner rooms for the rest of their lives. Amy's mind burned as it did every time she saw a widow, and even more when it was a child widow. This was not her fault, her mind cried. Did you expect an old man to outlive a vivacious little girl? You treat her as if she killed him herself. But she dare not say anything, or she would offend. These women didn't mean to be heartless, they just knew no other custom. This was the way their lives were. Only Jesus could change them. Amy threw a grateful glance at Ponnamal, living proof that Jesus could change a woman's heart. Another woman broke the silence. "I suppose you are a widow too?" she asked, eyeing Amy. "No," Amy replied. "I never married." "Never married? Never married?" It was unheard of in India. No man or woman ever reached such an age as Amy had obviously reached without marrying someone. "You mean you are married to a god," one woman interpreted. "No," Amy answered hastily. "I am not married in any way. I did not marry so I can do the work of my God more easily. My work is to tell his great story of salvation to you." With that introduction, Amy launched into a fresh explanation of the coming of the great God, Jesus Christ, of his salvation from sin, and of his promise for a home in heaven. But once again, the women only stared at them, and one said, "We let our husbands study the religion. We simply take care of the house. It is growing late." It wasn't, but Amy said, "Yes, we must be on our way." "Yes, too bad. Come again." "Yes, come again." Polite but insincere voices followed them. The two ladies had time to enter one last house before departing. Here they found a sight similar to the one they had left, except that this time a baby was crying and children played noisily. In the dim light, Amy could see that 2 or 3 of the women had white ashes smeared on their foreheads, a sure sign that they worshipped Siva, one of the 3 main Hindu gods. When she saw some young girls there, Amy asked tentatively, "Can anyone here read?" "Read?" The women laughed as if they had heard the best of jokes. "No, no one here can read." "If you would send us these girls, just a few hours a week, we could teach them." Teaching reading was one of the best opportunities to teach the gospel. "Now, why would we want to do that?" An older woman scoffed. "No woman in India learns to read, except the servants of the gods. They have a reason to." Temple women, who were married to the gods, were generally regarded as the greatest of religious servants, but they learned to read just so they could quote religious poetry by the hundreds of stanzas, poetry that was unrepeatable in any other language. We do not need to be able to read in order to care for the babies and feed the cows and spank the children. You speak to us if you like, but let the men do the reading. Amy spent an hour there telling the women about the love of Jesus. Bulls and cows wandered through the hut as she spoke, and the babies distracted her some, but she saw that the women really seemed to be paying attention. With joy, she noticed that one old lady couldn't take her eyes off her as she spoke. "She is close to Jesus," Amy thought. But suddenly the woman interrupted Amy's story and pointed to her hair. "Why don't you put oil in your hair?" she demanded. Amy was speechless. "Yes," said another lady, "I was wondering that too." She stroked her own oil-laden tresses. And then the other ladies joined in. "Can you not afford it? Is it not your custom? Castor oil is wonderful in the hair." Amy heaved her shoulders helplessly. Could it possibly be that she had been speaking for a whole hour, and these women hadn't heard a word she had said? Amy and Ponnamal sang, but they left when the women seemed to be growing restless. "Come back again," their hostess called out jovially. Mealtime was approaching, so Amy and Ponnamal didn't try to enter any more homes. They knew that just the glance of a white woman on their food would make these caste-conscious people feel that they had to throw their whole dinner away and start their cooking all over again with fresh food. Or, if there was none, they would go hungry. And then they would be in no mood to listen to the gospel. So the 2 ladies headed back towards the bandy. As usual, on their visits in villages, little children followed them in the streets, children who were not too afraid of what their parents would say if it was discovered they had talked with the Christians. For a few moments they listened to the story of Jesus. Some of the children seemed to be interested. It was different from anything they had ever heard before. As the night drew near, Amy promised, "We will come back and tell you more another day." She pulled her tired muscles into the bandy for the jolting ride home. The 2 women rode in silence for some minutes as Amy searched for words to describe her feelings. Then she said, "Sometimes I think that the children listen better than most of the women do. So many of their minds are so small." "The Indian woman's mind is small because her world is small," Ponnamal answered slowly. "Her whole life revolves around her family and the other women in one little village." She gestured back to the row upon row of drab brown huts they had left behind. "Her husband orders her not to think of religion or philosophy. He tells her to rub ashes on her forehead, and she does it. The average Indian woman thinks no higher thoughts than the gossip she hears around the village well. You ask most women about the next life, and they will smile and shrug. It is too far away." "But what about you, Ponnamal? You heard and trusted. And what about the others in the starry cluster? All of you loved the Lord so much that you even gave up your jewels for him." "Ah, yes," Ponnamal nodded wisely. "Sometimes, even the foolish, the Lord bends down and opens the ears, opens the eyes. There is still hope, even for the smallest of women's minds.